A lot of things got changed in the transition between Splatoon 1 and Splatoon 2, and none I think more than quick respawn, which I think is one of the most nerfed abilities in the history of this game. Not only did it get an additional activation condition, but it was also given a direct counter in the form of respawn punisher. Now, all of that I think is fair. Like, back in Splatoon 1, it was the single most broken ability in the game. But even still, because it's one of only 6 abilities in the game that don't give combat stats, I think this lends it some form of universality even after the nerfs. Like, sure, swimming fast is good, but weapons like Splatlings aren't gonna swim enough to justify running swim speed. Intensify action is great for making your weapons more accurate, but weapons like sloshes and charges are already perfectly accurate, so why would they need it? But everyone can run quick respawn, since when all's said and done, death comes for us all. But it's also an ability where I believe its value isn't well understood and is severely undervalued in mid-level competitive play. I can't speak for the higher ranks, I'm not there, but even if we can all agree that quick respawn is good on weapons like Tetras and Inkbrush, how many of us can explain why without saying because they die lots? So that's kind of what I want to discuss in this video. Okay, so this is going to start simple, but bear with me, this is really important. So in order to win a ranked mode of Splatoon, your team needs to knock out the objective, or failing that, need to have gotten closer to knocking out than your opponent did by the time the game ends. And it's important to note that the game takes the highest score that you got throughout the game. So as an example, let's say you play a game of Rainmaker, you pop the shield and immediately wipe the enemy team, and from there you push all the way to 20 points. Even if your team never touches the Rainmaker again for the rest of the game, so long as the enemy team never pushes past 20 points, you win. To steal a term from FLC, these rank modes are what I'm going to call a pseudo high watermark objective, where the game looks at the team that got the best push off overall to decide who wins the game. I say pseudo here since each mode has built-in ways of mitigating progress you made between each push, but it doesn't mitigate all of it. Splatoon has a penalty equal to about 75% of the points you earned in your last push when you lose the zone. Tower Control has checkpoints that make subsequent pushes easier if broken, plus the tower doesn't reset immediately. A Rainmaker also has checkpoints and doesn't reset immediately. Clan Blitz is an interesting one. Clan Blitz has a penalty equal to half the points you earned during your last push, but something I don't see people talk about much for Clan Blitz is that in order to break the basket and start scoring, you need a power clam. And interestingly, a power clam is made with 8 clams, which is normally worth about 24 points, but a power clam itself is worth 20, meaning you get reduced value per clam with repeated pushes. This is worse in Splatoon 2, as powers were worth the same but needed 10 clams instead of 8. What this means for how to play these modes is that these modes incentivize certain types of pushes over others. A team is rewarded a whole lot more for having longer, unbroken control of the objective. As an example, if we have 2 teams, Team Alpha and Team Bravo, if Team Alpha were to hold the zone for 30 seconds all in one go, they would gain 50 points by the time their push ends. Whereas if Team Bravo were to hold the zone for 30 seconds, but were to do so in 10-second intervals, their initial push would gain them 17 points, but leave them with a penalty of 13. The next push would advance by 17 points, but they have a 13-point penalty to get through, so they'd only really gain 4 points. The next push would be the exact same, only gaining them 4 more points in total. So even though both teams had the zone for the same amount of time, Team Alpha gets 50 points, whereas Team Bravo only gets 25, which is half the amount. Team Alpha was rewarded for trying to get one big push, whereas Team Bravo was punished for trying to slowly chip away at the objective. These new incentives can actually change the way we think about offense and defense. An ideal defense in a game like Overwatch, for example, would probably involve killing most if not all of the enemy team and clearing out the entire objective. Like in Splatoon, however, you don't need to go anywhere near that far. If you want to stop an enemy push, you've just got to capture the zone, or close the basket, or reset the Rainmaker. The moment you do that, all their progress is lost and they have to start again. This can then give you time to mount your own counterattack, especially since the enemy has likely blown a bunch of their resources for that push. You don't need the most robust defense, you just need to stop them from overtaking you. Likewise, your team is rewarded way more for investing into offense. The better your team can push, the less necessary it may be to invest into defense, since the point threshold the enemy team will need to pass will be higher with a more aggressive team. In this case, the best defense is, more often than not, a good offense. We get a good example of this when looking at the Rainmaker meta of late Splatoon 2. A couple of years ago, a massive shift in the Rainmaker meta occurred when Sploosh-O-Matic started getting really popular. As I understand it, this was because people were starting to realise that the poor defensive capabilities of the Sploosh's main weapon and kit mattered less due to its high mobility, paint and DPS, making for explosively quick and strong pushes. It was able to take small openings and run with it, and it only needed to happen once, since one good push with the Rainmaker would win you the game. So it's all well and good knowing that big all-in-one pushes are good, but the obvious next question to ask is, how do we get one? In a normal competitive game, the enemy team is not going to be so kind as to just let you have uncontested control of the objective for a good 30 to 40 seconds. They want to win the game too. However, as the game of Splatoon evolves, you'll find yourself with varying advantages over your opponent. Maybe you have more paint in a particular part of the map, maybe you have more or better specials, or maybe your team just outright got a kill. These small advantages don't win games on their own, but what they will do is present opportunities. Opportunities to start to snowball that advantage, to turn a small advantage into bigger, better advantages. Although an important thing to note about this is that certain weapons are a whole lot better at snowballing than others. Generally, weapons with high mobility and better fighting ability tend to be better at this. Think your Tetras, your Sloshers, and your Ink Brushes. Okay, for the sake of this, I'm going to dub these high tempo, high fighting power weapons snowball weapons, just like for the sake of these. And they're pretty good at this, whereas weapons like Elita, Heavy, Rapid Pro may not get the same kind of results. The reason why snowbally weapons are so good at pushing advantages often comes down to their high tempo and fighting power. Once you have an advantage of any kind, you often want to play into that as quickly as possible and make your opponents actually feel that advantage. If you have a special advantage, you want to pop those specials as soon as you reasonably can. Probably not instantly, but as soon as your team is in a position to play off of them. If you have a man advantage, you want to take as many fights or engagements where you have the extra player as possible. There's no point in an advantage if you're not doing anything with it, and the longer you wait, the more time your opponents have to either catch up or find advantages elsewhere. High tempo weapons like Inkbush and Tetris play into this really well, since they're really quick to act once they have an advantage and can rush down the opponents before they have time to reposition. And since you want to fight with your advantage, strong fighting weapons like Saucers and Tetras just naturally thrive in these kinds of situations. Obviously the opposite goes for weapons like Charges and Splatlings. They are incredibly slow, and weapons with poor fighting ability mean they don't exactly play to snowball. Though in the right situations, and if played around properly, they can make up for it in other ways, like the safety their range brings or their pick potential. Though as you face better and better teams, they're going to be careful not to just hand over these advantages to you. Hence why, as you start improving at the game, you've kind of got to start learning how to make your own. If you play in competitive or just someone who takes solo queue really seriously, you've probably been told that the way you push back in when the enemy team is trying to lock you out is by building and using multiple specials at once, or more accurately just chain multiple specials. The reason being is because by playing towards your specials, you're playing towards gaining a special advantage, which you intend to use to get back in. This is a pretty simple and well-known tactic, but it's not the only one. And for the sake of this video's QR theme, there's one in particular that I do want to mention. And to make sure we're on the same page again, I want us to understand that Splatoon is a game of limited resources, right? Your shots consume ink, which is a limited resource, your specials are a very limited resource and need to be recharged. Even more abstract things like time and attention are limited. Your attention can only be on one thing at a time. You can only shoot one player at a time or paint one part of the map at a time. Any time spent doing one thing is time that could have been spent doing other things. This is where our strong fighting weapons start to come in. Weapons that are quick to move and are strong to fight are really good at occupying enemy attention. An enemy that is occupied is an incredibly exploitable enemy. There's the obvious one where you can force 2v1s and distract your target while your teammate shoots them for free, but that doesn't always have to be the case. A Splattershot junior that's busy fighting a Tetra is a junior that won't contest your team when they try to paint the zone. And if you have multiple players floating this Tetra, this advantage only gets bigger. This tactic can be abused when trying to break out of lockout too. By attempting to engage the enemy, you can not only force the enemy to give away info on their position, but also draw their attention, giving your team opportunities to kill the distracted player, or at the very least, this distracted player exerts no control over the space around them while they are distracted, giving your team extra space to move in uncontested. What this is essentially doing is trading your time and attention for the time and attention of one or more enemy players, and done so in such a way that this isn't a fair trade, but is instead favoured for your team. Okay, so one thing about like these snowball weapons and the tactic of distracting is that they do have their weaknesses. One big one is that their playstyle sees them very exposed to this life-changing condition called death. Distracting on its own is an incredibly powerful tactic that can be used to get a decent advantage, especially since it doesn't necessarily cost any resources like specials. But it has the downside of needing a quick response from your team, and more importantly, engaging the enemy is a very easy way of dying. Due to how short range these weapons are, everything they do comes with some sort of risk. Just like how getting kills on your opponent is a really good way of creating and furthering your advantage, dying yourself is a really good way of losing it, and is a really good way of even giving that advantage to your opponent. While I am a firm believer in the idea that a game of Splatoon can be won without getting kills, it would be remiss of me to not mention just how impactful taking an enemy player out of the game for up to 15 seconds can be. Time, just like everything else in this game, is a limited resource, and so killing a player means forcing them to spend that time doing nothing. This is finally where quick respawn comes in after God knows how long of preamble, since Yeah, all of this was preamble, since quick respawn is a great way of mitigating the impact of these weapons' deaths, and mitigating them in ways that open up new options. So obviously QR means that you get punished less for your mistakes. That is true, and there is value in that, but what I mean when I say that QR is valuable is that QR means that the value of a kill on a quick respawn user is suddenly worth a whole lot less than a kill on a not quick respawn user. The ability itself devalues the resources spent on that player. A scenario that is pretty common with distracting is that you go in to engage the enemy, you end up dying to the enemy, but then your team kills that enemy. It would seem like that's a fair trade, but it turns out that if you have 50 AP worth of quick respawn and a bit of stealth jump, it starts to look a whole lot less fair. It will take the enemy about 12 seconds to get back into the action, but you, with all your quick respawn and stealth jump, may only take 6 to 7 seconds. In this scenario, alongside the value that distracting just inherently has, quick respawn has also given you 5 extra seconds worth of time to work with. It has generated you a resource, and while it may not seem like much, trust me, 5 seconds is a really long time in a game of Splatoon and is more than enough to start a snowball with. And its value doesn't end with trades. If we look at specials, for example, specials are a great way to get the ball rolling and to keep it rolling. Specials are incredibly valuable resources, and so when using them, it's always the player's goal to get as much value out of them as possible. If the enemy team were to use their Trizooka to start a push and manage to get a kill with it, they've got some good value, since they've given their team 10 to 15 seconds worth of man advantage. Now, if the player they killed were to have a lot of QR and stealth jump again, we're looking at something more like 6 to 7 seconds worth. Already just by having active quick respawn, we've reduced the value of this Trizooka, but the value a Trizooka gets isn't just in the kills it gets. It does put down paint, and it can force the opposing team near its target to play more passive in order to not accidentally die. This is value that it gets regardless of how quickly its target respawns. But if our quick respawn target were to accept its probable death, there are ways that even that type of value could be reduced. If we were to take a side angle and draw the shots away from the objective line, with the Zooka redirected, your team is more able to engage the enemy knowing that there is no threat of a Zooka wiping them off the map. And this kind of tactic is a whole lot easier for our snowbally weapons to perform, since their good mobility lets them move to these positions, and their strong fighting power lets them pose a threat that isn't easily ignored. Even if we were to go down in this situation, you've traded 6 seconds of your time for an entire special and space on the map, and your team likely still has specials they can use to get value. Suddenly, it's been made a whole lot harder for the enemy team to start a snowball from just that special. The same principle can be used in other ways. If you find yourself in a losing fight that the enemy team will be able to start a push from, instead of trying to survive it, you can try to take the fight away from the objective to a less useful part of the map. Even if you die without getting a trade, the enemy or enemies that manage to get you will still need to rotate to a useful part of the map. Until then, they're also practically a player down. If it takes 3 seconds to do so and you have a 6-second respawn time, that only gives them 3 seconds to work with before you're able to respawn and stealth jump back in. It is quick respawn that makes this viable. Sure, you can try to do this without quick respawn, but the time you save is nothing. 3 seconds off a 12-second respawn time won't have much impact. You're often better trying to survive than you are trying this, but 3 seconds of a 6-second respawn time is a whole lot, and quick respawn already means that they don't have much time to work with, and then you go and halve it. The more quick respawn you have, the more you may be willing to trade your own life for other resources such as time and space. The more attractive these risky but rewarding plays start to look. And while a lot of the examples I'm giving here are in a context of defending, the same tactics can be used when trying to snowball your own advantages. They're not as strong, since when trying to push, pushes normally come with kills, which deactivates quick respawn. Though due to what I'm going to call the tendency to multi-kill, that isn't as much of an issue as it may seem at first. The tendency to multi-kill, it's kind of in the name. When you kill an enemy player, what that usually does is create a massive weakness, a gap in the enemy's position that can be exploited. If a short to mid-range weapon got the kill, it's incredibly likely that they're already in a prime position to exploit that positional weakness and turn that into even more kills. What that means for the context of quick respawn is that even in pushes where the enemy is going 2 to 3 down at a time, it's likely only 1 or 2 players on your team are losing their quick respawn. If your team is heavily investing into quick respawn, it's likely that someone will have quick respawn available so they can use the aforementioned tactics when pushing. And this is a thing you can ignore entirely if your quick respawn is coming from tactical, since kills don't deactivate it. So while quick respawn may not be the perfect catch-all when it comes to slowing down the enemy push, in practice you don't need a perfect defense. All you really need is a good push, and you only need it to happen once. Quick respawn helps with that by patching up your defense and giving you more opportunities to fish for an advantage. So that about covers it. I hope I've convinced someone that quick respawn is the best ability in the game, but on a final note, I have an obligation as a person inside a YouTube video on the internet to ask you to kindly perform the actions of licking and subscribing, and with that out of the way, pasta la vista.